we're live. All right. Hello, everyone. Look, it's two ecosystem sessions in a week. And this one's particularly exciting. So we have Jared, Art, and Matt here to talk about HoloFuel V2. It's funny because I was just thinking as we were about to go live, I think it was early 2017 or something like that. I first met these guys, and there was some kind of call. It was I don't know. It was I think it was a potluck call or something, like lunch call. Um, and I think Jared certainly was in his car. Art, I'm sure, was in a car of some kind. Not sure Matt was, and maybe there were one or two other people. And I was like thinking at the time, I don't know if I'm going to ever be doing calls from my car. And here I am, 7 years later, in a car somewhere in the countryside, hosting an ecosystem session. It's fantastic to be here, and I think we've got a lot of exciting content. I know in various forums you've been asking. We've talked a little bit about the structural changes across the Holochain ecosystem, and you've been asking, well, what are the implications for HoloFuel? So we're here today to talk a little bit about changes, the work that's going on, what you might expect, and some of the progress. So before I hand over to Jared to jump in and chat through some specifics, I think I'll just go back quickly to the context. So you might have heard this from the delivery brief or some of our materials, but HoloFuel specifically is being modified to function as an asset-backed mutual credit unit of account for various decentralized physical infrastructure projects. So when it's ready, Holo will be using HoloFuel as well as other projects. So taking the opportunity to connect to the broader demand for this asset-backed mutual credit that's deployed in a decentralized way. Art is going to talk a little bit more about that context. Then the name of HoloFuel is also going to change. We're not going to announce that just yet. So we're just calling it HoloFuel version 2 or HFV2, if you see it in various comms around. And again, more on that in a minute. The other change you may be aware of, but HoloFuel isn't going to be managed by Holo. So the software for HoloFuel V2 is being built by a new organization. It's also owned by the Holochain Foundation, and that's being driven by the four of us and some others who aren't here on this call. And that was a large part of the structural change that we've been communicating. One of the major reasons for that is because there is a broader adoption and broader demand for these distributed mutual credit currencies. And we want to be able to move swiftly to take advantage of that still while providing the needs for Holo and our hosts. And the final piece is redemptions of HOT for HoloFuel V2 will be available on the launch of HoloFuel V2. Okay. So that's some of the context and just in how today's going to work. So I'll hand over to Jared. He'll talk through some specifics, and then Art's going to talk a little bit about the pivot, and Matt's going to talk about the business development and some of the conversations that he's been having, which is very interesting. Some of the insights. I'll touch on a little bit of like adoption, and yeah, then we'll give it a wrap. And please ask questions as always. We'll answer anything that's in the chat or in various forums, Telegram, etc. And then there's some more details. We don't want to overwhelm you today, so we'll probably have another session in 2-3 weeks before Christmas, going through some of the specifics. Guys, is there anything else I should add before we hand over to Jared? Super.
No, that sounds
all right,
good.
Jared. So if you want to pick up some of the community questions, so the first one is, will HoloFuel still be called HoloFuel?
Yeah, so you actually answered most of this already, David, but the truth is it won't be called HoloFuel any longer because it's going to be bigger than just Holo. So we're going to create a new name for the unit of account that was formerly called HoloFuel. Currently, as you mentioned, we're just calling it HoloFuel version 2 or HFV2 or version 2 or V2. but it won't be the actual name in the long term for the accounting unit when Holo begins to use it. So that's what we're doing right now.
Awesome, cool. And will HoloFuel be offered on external exchanges?
So this is one we get asked a lot. We don't know yet, and we don't want to speculate any further on this question. Rather than talk about it, about like what might happen in the future. We'd rather just focus on building accounting software that's useful for people.
Awesome. Okay, so you're saying there's a difference between HoloFuel accounting unit and this accounting system. So if other projects adopt the accounting system, do they use this HoloFuel accounting unit or do they bring their own accounting unit?
So any projects that join this DePIN accounting system alongside Holo will be using a single common accounting unit. So for prototype purposes, we're just calling that HFV2 as mentioned, so HoloFuel V2, but they will be using a single common unit.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, and is the supply of hot changing?
Nope. It hasn't ever changed since the ICO. It's a fixed supply written in the ERC20 contract for hot. And it's a question we get a lot, but it hasn't changed for 7+ years.
And it can't change. It's a fixed supply already written into the smart contract.
And okay, so final question. So HoloFuel's value was said to be backed according to decentralized computing and the supply and demand of hosting. So how will HoloFuel be increasing how will the increase of utility or increasing or broader use of HoloFuel affect this supply and demand dynamic?
So HoloFuel's value is still going to be backed by real utility, just as it was with Holo hosting, but now it won't just be Holo hosting. It'll also be backed by other DePIN services. Could be a number of different DePIN services. We're talking to different groups related to decentralized compute like Holo, but also storage, bandwidth, VPN, etc. In short, there's going to be a bunch of asset-backed options from the different DePIN projects that use this new unit of account, HFV2, as we're calling it as a prototype. But we don't know all the projects that are going to be part of the alliance. But we're working with more than a handful currently, which both Matt and David will talk about more in a little bit. But yeah, I think that covers it.
Awesome. Okay. Maybe to give a little bit of context over this pivot, and then we can go into a little bit like the progress, how things are looking, etc.
Yeah. I want to say a couple of things that because we sort of jumped into this full steam and people I think are still adjusting to this kind of reorganization that's happened where Holo, which was our main operating entity, has kind of split into three different projects. One being Holo still for the hosting network, one being Holochain Foundation, and then this one, the HoloFuel project, which is shifting its focus. But in part, what we learned is that if we launched Holo, we didn't have many things to host on Holo. But what we're finding is that there are a lot of projects that have tackled like DePIN infrastructure and have raised funds using blockchain tokens and have problems trying to use the blockchain token that they capitalize themselves with to power their own internal accounting of usage of a decentralized network. This is where I'd actually almost like to lean on you, Matt, to give us the approximate quote that you got from one of the largest projects out there about, the need for this. Can you chime in on that real quick?
Yeah, I mean, it was basically that every DePIN project is going to need something like this because if they don't think they need it, it's just because they haven't had usage at scale yet, right? When you've got devices that are doing a tiny amount of work and you're needing to do a little bit of accounting to recognize that work, if the accounting requires a whole lot more work than what you're trying to recognize, the whole thing doesn't make sense. And that's the case in most of these DePIN projects, right? This is machine-to-machine communication. There's lots of it, but it's very small. And so the low cost is really important, but also the high volume is really important. There's a handful of blockchains that have gained quite a bit of adoption by DePIN projects in over the last year or so, mostly because of the low cost, but also because they have better transaction volumes. But even the best of those have nothing close to the kind of transaction volume a really functioning, viable, larger DePIN project would need, even one. And so the bottlenecks of blockchain just don't really fit. And the last piece I'll say there is just that that leader, founder of this pretty significant DePIN project, mentioned, hey, it was great to be able to raise in a blockchain. It's great to be able to allow people to access things through a blockchain token that has, can be accessed through exchanges, et cetera. But it's not so great to have to actually operate internally with that same token. So being able to have something paired with that can be efficient enough and scalable enough for the internal accounting of the system was delightful. I guess I'll frame it that way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just jump in for a sec and just build on very quickly from Ali, because I mean, we've been dealing with this a lot for the last 5, 6, 7 years. The other side of it is that a lot of these DePIN projects, it's not just from a technology perspective, they're then confusing, I think, as Art was pointing to, the capitalization token and how it works and how rewards work. And so if we know effective tokenized systems have programmatic and consistent rewards, right? And the level of activity to earn those rewards varies. Whereas a lot of the projects in this space, they're trying to reward activity, which is variable, with a capitalization token. So they also, and then going to Matt's point, they're also struggling with their operational load. And so one of the things that people will also do is just maintain the inner workings in some kind of database, which has a whole series of other issues. So I think we're hitting the zeitgeist as these DePIN projects scale, because we know it's the future. This is one of the reasons we started focusing on distributed cloud 7 years ago. But we have challenges with technology. We have challenges with currency design and system design. And then we also have challenges with decentralization that all we're looking to solve.
Having something that is designed for accounting to be doing this accounting is part of what gets people out of, because some of these DePIN projects that are building decentralized infrastructure in order to address this problem that they're confronting of blockchain being too slow or too heavy, too expensive to do their operational accounting on, they then just create a centralized database, which kind of undermines the whole decentralization of the infrastructure in the first place, but it lets them do the accounting cheap and fast and easy,
Yep.
right? But there are other side effects to that. One, potential loss of confidence of their community from centralizing something that was supposed to be decentralized. But the other is actually a possible regulatory consequence, which is if they now start having centralized control over something that was supposed to be decentralized, that can carry other liabilities and responsibilities to regulators that they may not want. And so we're trying to actually, this was a long prelude here, but what I'm trying to actually do is have people understand there's a real demand for this out there. And now let's talk more about what this is. I'm going to actually share screen to have some visuals here for this. And so the idea here is we're talking about HoloFuel version 2 is actually meeting the demand for scalable decentralized accounting. We've already talked about that. We kind of hammered that point home here. One of the things is to simplify also regulatory overhead and scope. This is actually part of why we split into multiple entities, is that even though we regularly made headway with the regulators about limiting what they wanted to regulate about Holo, there was so much like turnover and kind of like loss of institutional knowledge within the regulators that new people would come back and try to understand the project, and then they would try to go into regulating a hosting framework, and a financial services regulation committee isn't really set up to try to regulate hosting and content and all of those kinds of things. And so by separating it from the hosting business, by separating the actual currency, we simplify what the regulatory scope is and what the regulators would be looking at, and we keep them from getting distracted by things that are kind of outside of that scope. And what we've done is we've pushed the functional configuration. So those of you that are geeks about HoloFuel and like the idea that it's a mutual credit accounting currency, in other words, a net zero supply. So it's neither inflationary nor deflationary. Theoretically, it functionally can expand and contract as the actual usage of the network demands, without it having to be about burning or issuing tokens. It's really about the expansion and control of the credit limits within the system based on actual earnings and usage. But in the process, by joining this project with other DePIN projects, by joining this unit of account, this accounting with other DePIN projects, we increase the utility and value of HOT while leveraging some of the advantages of Holochain. We're actually not going to talk much about those advantages of Holochain, I think. But here I'd like to give the example of what happens when you join these things together. So we're increasing utility and value, just like United Airlines increases the value of their miles that they have when they are part of an alliance that lets those miles get you anywhere in the world, get you all over the place, 1,300 different airports, and there's more places you can go. So what we're essentially doing by binding the unit of account with other DePIN projects is having it be that there's more things that you can get with your tokens that you already have. So a metaphor we've been using here is that of a swimming pool, a common pool of water in terms of the DePIN units inside the alliance, but with different lanes, swimming lanes that are configured to function slightly differently. So it's a common pool, but with different functional swim lanes. And so the way that works is like somebody may come in, swap in, or come in by spending HOT to get some of the formerly known as HoloFuel, will be called something else, DePIN type units here. And that gets them into the pool. Now, once you're in the pool, you can spend your units on Holo hosting or on a cloud hosting or Wi-Fi access, 3D printing. These are example networks. We have other things, other example networks, Bluetooth tracking and stuff like that of projects that we're talking with. But we are at the moment only using Holo as the named example in here because we haven't closed any of these other deals quite yet. They actually need to see the proof of concept functioning, we'll get there talking about that. But if you spend your credits on Holo hosting, the hosts can redeem them out to HOT because they did work for the Holo hosting network, and therefore they can go out the redemption pool for Holo. Similarly, if the hosting that you purchased was cloud hosting, they can redeem that out for some cloud token that was used to raise the funds and that kind of thing. So we know these tokens are going to be on exchanges and probably already are on exchanges. We don't know, as Jared said, whether this will ever get listed on an exchange. We don't want to speak to that yet because that's actually going to be a decision that the alliance of groups will need to make together. So then, what are the raves? We haven't talked about what a rave is. A rave is our version of a smart contract. We basically pushed the functionality of how the system is configured into smart contract-like things. And and that's not supposed to be on this page here, but when each lane needs to basically define how somebody proves that they've delivered service, what service fees are being charged in that process, how those things can be redeemed, and how those things are sold, how you come into the lane, how you leave the lane, what happens when you're in the lane, essentially. These are some of the required contracts that each of the projects have to define for their lane. And then how a transaction works in HoloFuel is that it's a two-step process. You send it by either recording a spend or a link that parks funds on one of these agreements, one of these raves. A rave is I don't remember if I said it yet, but a record of agreement verifiably executed. It's our counterpart to a smart contract in an agent-centric context. So you can park funds on an agreement, and then when that agreement is executed and the funds get allocated, you can receive funds either from a sending transaction or from the output of a rave. And so it's a two-step process, but in each case, it actually means that each agent shows on their chain all the inputs and outputs that you need to compute their balance. And so it keeps the verification and validation actually pretty lightweight and simple. I think that's like the main stuff that I wanted to cover with visuals. Was there anything else in the sheet that I'm supposed to say?
Yeah, there was. There's some stuff about, why we were building HoloFuel, some of the things we learned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so part of the thing was like why we were building HoloFuel in the first place was we needed something that could do lightweight, cheap, scalable, transactions to the tune of, billions of microtransactions a day that wouldn't carry too much overhead. And that's, again, we kind of harped on that point earlier, what a lot of these projects need. And yeah, I think the main thing that I want to say is we are planning some compatibility potentially with other smart contract platforms, like the ability to do Solana-like Rust contracts in our BPF engine for executing them, that kind of thing. Like we will have other kinds of execution infrastructure available, but Holochain hasn't quite solidified its conductor service definitions yet, and those would need to function as a conductor service. So what we've done for our proof of concept implementation of this is we've used a scripting language inside of Rust called RHAI, RHAI, and we have already built a proof of concept of this. It's not quite complete, but we do expect to complete it in the next 2 or 3 weeks and have some initial groups that have expressed interest start some testing so that they can see integration. They'll probably wait till after the holidays, but we want them to be able to start testing on it, in the first of the year for being able to actually see what it would be like to integrate with their systems. Is there anything else, Matt, that I was supposed to say?
I don't think so. I think you covered all of the how will it work stuff, etc.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit on what's happening now on the business front. Incorporation, that kind of thing.
One of the things that we did in the process of breaking out HoloFuel into a separate regulatory entity is we are also switching jurisdictions. So at the moment, we are incorporating in British Virgin Islands, and we have the things in process for this entity to come into being. So far, Holo is still paying the bills. We haven't become a completely separate functioning entity yet, but that's how we still have, software developers building it and everything without having become incorporated yet. And we are, we want to have our first handful of groups come together to start testing this and creating the first kind of DAO or alliance inside the system.
Yeah, Matt, before we hand Yeah,
Yeah.
before we jump in to give the little bit of the business and insight, uh, um, could we just get the swim lane diagram up one more time? Yeah. All right. Okay. All right. So I think what's really, really, really interesting about this is for for any of you watching that followed in June of this year or earlier this year, when the Artificial Superintelligence Alliance was formed, which was Singularity Net, Fetch AI, and Ocean Protocol effectively merging their tokens. And one of the things, the commentary coming out of Outlier Ventures and a series of other places was it's likely for successful capitalization tokens or successful utility tokens in the future to either merge or aggregate, or at least for one to become like a more dominant player as a as almost like an index of value. And I think what's really, really interesting, I remember reading that and thinking about it quite a bit. And and while that structure is attractive in some cases, I think like what we're outlining here is a really far more exciting way of understanding value, where the value is actually all around the activity and the work that's done. So in the swim lane, it's all around the right-hand side, where we're actually performing all these value creating activities and actually having the superstructure or the shared unit exist on this level is a very, very exciting innovation for the industry. So I just wanted to pull that out because I think like it aligns very strongly with some of the meta themes of the industry right now, but we're capable of doing so in an area that no other ecosystem and no other project is. And I believe that it's an area, and I think this is a nice segue into Matt. It's an area that while the demand is not necessarily expressed in this way because people don't know that actually, you're capable in a decentralized way of providing these kind of things. It's actually a demand that's coming from real growing businesses looking for how they can change the way they operate. So yeah, on Matt, love to hear what you've been learning, who you've been talking to, and some of these other updates.
I see Art has something to add.
Oh,
Go ahead, Art.
oh yeah.
All right, yeah, I just realized we didn't put this in the FAQ, but I can hear the question happening in the background as you talk about this, David, is so what does that mean about the value of these different outside currencies and how do you price coming in and out and all that kind of stuff? And I just want to say that HoloFuel's original pricing algorithm was already designed for multiple input output accounts and currencies because we already knew we were going to have hot and that we might have dollars and euro and yen and other types of things. And so we actually created pricing mechanisms that are driven by the demand for the volume that the hosts are basically cashing out through, which basically means you're by having by being one of the networks that's in demand and getting lots of usage, the value of your token is rising essentially. So it's a self-balancing system based on where the actual need for the usage within the system is. And that's how you keep it from like diluting the water in the pool too much by adding by adding another lane, is that you know that you're still going to be valued based on the usage on your network. And so you want to make sure you're vetting projects to be bringing in projects that are going to have some usage. And so we weren't really going to talk about this, but I could definitely see in the future there being other pools, meaning other DePIN DAOs, other groups, maybe of projects in different stages of maturity that they're teaming together, just like there's different airline alliances. But our focus obviously is at the outset really on this first one that Holo is going to have. Can I stop the sharing that, or do you need any more
Yeah,
vision?
no,
Yep.
you can stop it. Great, thank you, Art. Yeah, we've touched on a bunch of stuff that I was going to talk about, including one of the stories I was going to tell when we got to this part. So I will leave that story, but I can mention that, you know, a lot of what I've been doing, and alongside David, basically, has been reaching out to projects. For me, especially reaching out to DePIN projects, and just researching, you know, who's out there, what are they doing, and there's a variety, right? There are folks that are pretty similar to us, like they're doing some form of decentralized hosting. There's others that are really focused on storage. There's some that are focused on, you could think of it as hosting, but it's not. They're focused on compute. That compute may be in the training of AI models. That compute may have to do with the, oh, I'm blanking on the word, rendering of video or 3D models or something like that, right? Other ones have to do with VPN, digital virtual private networks, or decentralized virtual private networks. And there's things well beyond that, including, you know, projects that have cameras and they're doing mapping and they're creating a big map together as a community. Others that have little devices that are listening and sort of pinging and noting where other devices are in geographic space, right? And being able to make attestations about the physical location of different devices, including potentially lost ones, lost cars, motorcycles, etc. And so there's a wide variety of these. And some of what we're up to at present is reaching out and finding out, hey, and this is what I was up to. I was doing customer validation. We think that this is a real problem, this high cost, low transaction volume. And if you're collapsing your capitalization token with your utility token, or your utility unit of account, there's regulatory complexity there. But is it just us? Or are you all experiencing these as high priority issues as well? And what I'm hearing from project after project is, yeah, that's a real issue for us. For some of them, it hasn't been yet, but we know if we start to gain adoption, it will be. For others, it's regardless of whether we have adoption, we're having a hard time getting a bank account, or we've had a bank account, but we're struggling to keep the bank account. Like, we're having to do all these contortions to try to avoid getting debanked. And so it's been interesting. Like, I'll have a conversation with somebody and they're like, oh my gosh, this is phenomenal. And you need to talk to so-and-so, this other person who founded another DePIN project that I know. And so that's been the experience that I've been having the last few weeks, as we're trying to just make sure that we're solving the right problem and find folks who are willing to try it out and see, hey, does this solve your problem? The one other thing that I'll say, and part of the reason that I'm doing such sort of a broad exploration across the DePIN space, because it's an unknown, I don't know the answer to it yet, but that is, how different can these DePIN projects be and still sort of make sense in this alliance alongside Holo? How similar do they need to be in terms of what things they're offering for us to be able to manage credit limits adequately, et cetera? And Arthur probably has a better sense of that. You know, our belief is, oh, these things are pretty solid, but we're probably not going to have a project that's doing compute alongside somebody who's dealing with elder care or some food project, food delivery in a local community. Like, those are just radically different things. And so having those all within one unit of account probably doesn't make sense. So for us, we're focused on DePIN, right? But what are the boundaries of DePIN? I see all kinds of things. Some of them are like, hey, it's usernames. I don't know if usernames counts as DePIN for us. I kind of doubt it, right? That feels more like just a blockchain thing, rather than individuals operating physical infrastructure, making that available to others and needing to do accounting to be recognized for the work that they're doing. I think David's going to actually touch on sort of the different phases of our development and growth on all this, but I can leave it there for now. David, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, sure. So, um, yeah, making all this concrete where there are three sort of phases that we're targeting. So the first is we wanted to have 4 or 5 projects. Actually, to completely, it really doesn't matter what kind of mutual credit they want to make. We just want people testing what's being built as soon as it's building. So where I mean, I I'm not sure exactly who's watching this, but I'm sure I've spoken to a number of you, and I'm sure you've had a complaint around timeframes, and it's and and I think we've all said, like, in a way we've all felt the same thing. So what we're doing in this structure is putting in place the pattern that we all prefer, which is essentially we're building stuff for and with customers, and we're getting live feedback, right? So we have that group, and we've got 5 interested and we don't want really more than that, but 5 groups interested in being almost like the bleeding edge testers. So as we're doing our engineering,
the
we're
alpha
testing stuff,
testers.
we're seeing what breaks, etc. The alpha testers, perfect. The alpha testers. So, and it looks like alpha testers will be, I'm not sure the exact date that they'll be testing, but it's going to be soon enough in the new year. Um, art and engineering made it, like, I think, a ton of leaps over the past 6 to 8 weeks in how we can get things out faster, and also address what we want HoloFuel V2 to look like. So it's been a lot of progress, and part of that is that actually, because we've got these groups really demanding, they want to get something in their hands. It's very motivating to be able to work rapidly. At the same time, we have the DAO that Art is being talked about. So this is like the next phase in that pipeline, and looking for potential members alongside Holo in this DePIN unit of account, as well as seeding some conversations on with other groups that would like to have their own, essentially want to build their own specialized alliance in their own particular area. And so the combination of those things drives the initial testing and making sure all the technology is fit for purpose. It drives then this first DAO and the ability to get HoloFuel V2 turned on as quickly as possible, as well as the long-term sustainability and growth of this kind of like underlying accounting system with seeding those other conversations. So very, very, very positive so far. The focus has really been on both parts of the pipeline, and the response is fantastic. And then we'll be working more as like various conversations that Matt's alluding to, but we're working more with materials, case studies, and context to make it really easy. Because if you think about, like, what we're almost doing from a DePIN perspective is we're allowing businesses that are really strong on the hardware, yep, to not have to build their own accounting systems. And when you say it like that, it kind of makes sense. Like, a lot of people use Xero or all sorts of other systems. Like, these businesses aren't going and building their accounting solutions, right? We would think that would be ludicrous in most contexts, and in a decentralized context, we're kind of expecting that everybody is. So we see, we see huge opportunity in being the accounting system provider for all of these hardware efforts, and then there's a whole other spectrum that's in the longer term and not our focus right now, but still on the edges of the Holochain ecosystem, of all sorts of other things that aren't even, DePIN or hardware related, that we think, like, we can focus on in the longer term. Matt.
And I'll just clarify something. So David mentioned a word that we hadn't been talking about, which was DAO. We mentioned alliances. Sometimes just internal to the team, we're talking about these as, this DePIN alliance or a DePIN DAO. It's probably not going to be smart contract based entirely. There'll be contracts, et cetera. So this will be an alliance of multiple projects working alongside one another, and the rave or smart contract stuff that's actually baked in at the software level. The one other piece that I'll share is, and this is kind of a more personal thing. From my perspective, this is kind of a puzzle pieces landing back in their right place moment. I've known Arthur for a decade or so now. Jared and I have worked alongside Arthur that whole time. We've worked alongside David for, since we started working on Holo. And Arthur's like one big passion in life, and many of you probably know this already, but is accounting systems, signaling systems, and specifically the signaling systems that enable communities to see, sense, respond to, and sculpt flows of activity. And so getting Arthur, and Arthur is the architect of Holochain, the architect of HoloFuel, right? But he's worn a lot of hats in the Holochain org over time. And he doesn't get to take off all of those hats right now, but he's getting to focus on the thing that he is really passionate about, and that is building accounting systems that can really unlock capacity. And so for me, I look at this and like, okay, cool, we're setting up a little tiny software business, and there's another little business that's going to deal with kind of regulatory onboarding, offboarding of currency stuff. And we're structuring those so that they take really tiny fees as part of an offering alongside these customer projects. And those projects have a way of, taking little tiny fees as well. And so it's working for them too. But really, this is about enabling those to work and taking, as David just said, the headache of having to figure out and invent a viable accounting system from scratch for each of these projects. No, that's not their focus. Their focus is whether it's compute or enabling new AI models to get trained or rendering video or providing additional bandwidth, et cetera, et cetera. And so for me, this is a little bit of, this feels good. And my experience, and Jared can probably speak to this too, maybe Arthur and David as well. My experience has been that this shift of Holochain and Holo and HoloFuel kind of breaking out and having some smaller teams, each working and focusing specifically on each of those components, has felt like it's unleashed a whole bunch of energy and movement and improvement very quickly. And so I'll just leave it at that.
Perfect. Jared or Art, anything that you guys want to add before we wrap?
I just want to say that it has not only had that effect on this project on the HoloFuel side, such that we've been able to get to a proof of concept of a complete rebuild of this within a matter of weeks. That's functioning, and it isn't audited, it isn't fully tested, but we were able to move very quickly. I'm just observing the same thing happening with the Holochain team and even with the Holo hosting org that has taken a long time to deliver hosting, but it had all of these other things entangled with it, and actually disentangling these things. It's like when we had the meetings and figured out to do this, it was sort of like we wished we had figured it out a year earlier. Like, I just want to acknowledge that things have been slow. There have been delays, and yeah, I wish we would have figured this out a year earlier. I think we would have moved a lot faster and have been able to navigate these things quite differently. But here we are doing it now, and it does feel good because it feels like we're actually firing on all cylinders now, and been overdue.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Art. Jared, anything from you?
Yeah, I mean, I just really wanted to encourage everyone out there to reach out. We went really light on the questions around HoloFuel for this call because we wanted to focus more on kind of setting context and not overwhelm with like, here's all the details and how it's all going to work. And that context we think and we hope will give people better questions to ask. And, we'd love to follow up with those questions in the future. So please reach out with questions, but also reach out if you're a DePIN project, or if you know someone, know someone at a DePIN project that should reach out, like, please, share the news. And on that front, just want to again thank our entire community. And communities, really, because it's all sorts of different small groups of people and larger groups of people that have been supporting us for a long time. And I know sometimes that's been challenging, but we are getting somewhere. And yeah, we appreciate you.
Super. Okay. Well, thanks, Jared. Thanks, Art. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, been fantastic progress over the last couple of months. And as I bring this to a close, I'm not sure who watched the ecosystem session with Vola and Dr. Vertha and Eric Harris-Baron, or Dr. Eric, on earlier this week. But if you did watch it, or if you hadn't, please catch please catch it, because you can see these two things coming together really, really clearly, as Dr. Wurtzer at the end is talking about devices that will have these like broad mesh networking capabilities, essentially being able to transcend the current telecom system and be able to build these like local but interconnected networks. As he started talking, like one of the biggest passions deep down is actually the movement and expression of value. So it seems pretty important that we're making these active, rapid steps now, because we want to be ready for those moments when we're able to attribute and move value on a Vola phone, moving from chat to backup, app stores, all sorts of other tools. And so suddenly we can do movement of value. And that's a huge driver for me personally. And I know everyone here and a lot of people in the ecosystem is that we're going to be able to get there. And so it's also fantastic with Vola that we already have a partner that's a big demand. They're not in that necessarily first wave of testers, but they're the motivated to get through the first wave, because then when people are starting to move value on a Vola phone, it's going to be another big milestone. So exciting times all around. Thank you so much for listening, joining. Thank you for everyone who's on the journey with us. As Jared said, please reach out and have a wonderful day.
Perfect.